Welcome everyone to the NUSAI Health Community. This initiative, brought to you by the Analyse Center for Nursing Studies, ALKANS, at the Yon Luoline School of Medicine, National University of Singapore, NUS, is part of the NUSAI Community of Practice, NUSAI-CA. Our primary aim is to educate healthcare professionals on the application of artificial intelligence, AI, in healthcare. This project is funded by the NUS Center for Teaching, Learning and Technology, CTLT, Teaching Enhancement Grants, TEG, FY 2023/2024. Within our learning community, we offer foundational AI knowledge and skills tailored specifically for healthcare professionals. We also promote collaboration and share AI-integrated teaching plans for healthcare education among local and international participants. Allow me to introduce the dedicated members of the NUSAI Health Community who contribute their expertise and enthusiasm towards leveraging AI for the betterment of healthcare. We also extend our gratitude to NUS Center for Teaching, Learning and Technology, CTLT, for their invaluable contributions towards funding and publicity, which have been instrumental in making our community thrive. But that's not all. Brace yourselves for our monthly webinars featuring expert speakers delving into AI and its myriad applications in healthcare industry and education. Additionally, our platform serves as a hub for learning resources and event updates, ensuring you stay updated of all the latest developments. And if that's not enticing enough, our YouTube channel hosts a wealth of training courses focused on AI in the healthcare industry and education. Don't miss out on the opportunity to be part of this dynamic community. Subscribe to our channel at NUSA Health Community and visit our website to stay tuned for exciting updates on our upcoming events.
Now it's my pleasure to introduce our distinguished speakers. He is currently an associate professor at Faculty of Medicine and Health, University of New South Wales, Australia. He is a leading expert in medical education with 20 years of experiences. He has received multiple awards, including the Vice Chancellor Award for Teaching Excellence. His research focuses on enhancing clinical reasoning and collaborative learning in healthcare. Today, he will deliver the webinar entitled Human-AI Partnerships: How Education and Practice Will Be Shaped. Please join me in welcoming Associate Professor Dr. Chintaka Balasurya. And he's here today with us. Yes, please, Prof, please go ahead. We'll look forward to hear your presentation. You're muted, I guess.
Yeah. Thank you, Piani. Thank you so much for that kind introduction. And welcome, everyone. Welcome to this session on human-AI partnerships. As many of you know, this is an area of great interest and one that's continuing to grow in interest as we speak. And so today I want to have this conversation with you, and I want to start by emphasizing that it is really a conversation that we are looking to have today. I really hope that this is a dialogue that you feel free to interact with me, and we have an interactive session as we move forward. I'm also very conscious that whenever we have these sessions, there's a huge amount of expertise within the audience. So I do welcome all forms of input from you, and especially when it comes to this particular topic, I think it's critically important that we recognize that none of us can claim to be an expert, and I don't by any means claim to be an expert in the technical sense of the word. My interest and expertise is from the perspective of pedagogy. So my background is in medicine and medical education. So the expertise that I bring is from the perspective of pedagogy and how we can apply AI to education, and how we can look at that through the lens of learning theories. So with that in mind, I'd like this to be really interactive, and I hope that at the end of these 90 minutes, we've all learned from each other, and we have something meaningful that we can take away. And there's one more thing that I want to highlight, but let's get into a bit of the context before I get there. So I thought it would be useful to set the context around why we thought this would be a good topic to focus on. And it sort of goes back to some of the work that I started doing, or my interest, since around 2019. And that was around an idea that I had related to conceptualizing our future practitioners as human AI duos. In other words, I had this idea of developing a personalized digital learning companion for all our incoming students. And the aim was to develop that personalized companion in a way that it would share the entire learning journey with our students. So the digital agent would form a complementary half of the human, and they would form this sort of dynamic duo. And this duo would proceed through the entire learning journey together. They'd be assessed together. They'd even graduate together, and they would enter the workforce together. And so this component, or this digital or virtual companion, would then transition to becoming an assistant to this student who's now a graduate or a practitioner. And these two would enter the workplace together. So that was the idea that I was developing since around 2019. But as you can imagine, around that time, the technology wasn't ready, the educational landscape wasn't ready, but now it certainly is ready. And now we start to visualize AI in a slightly different way. Because there's a lot of debate, as you'd have heard, around whether AI is going to replace us as humans. And I feel that's often a distraction, and that the more important question is to ask how AI can either enhance us or enable us to do something better. So how can AI enhance us as practitioners in the future? Now, when we look at that, that's when we start to see ourselves as in partnership with AI, or all of the digital platforms that are in development. And it requires a slight shift in the way we think. And so when we start to see AI as an enabler, we start to see the world through a slightly different lens. And that's the perspective that I want to bring to this webinar. I also want to invite you to look at this webinar as the start of a project. And when we come to the end, I don't want to think of you to think of it as the end of a conversation, but rather I'd like you to think of it as the start of a collaborative project that we can take forward beyond the life of this webinar, so that we can actually develop something meaningful for ourselves as educators. So with that in mind, I'm going to take an approach that will be very practical in nature, but as educators, as scholarly educators, we know that we have to be grounded in educational theory. So it's going to be a practical approach grounded in educational theory. I hope that makes sense so far. Piani, can I just check
Good.
that the slides are moving and everything's working okay?
Yeah, everything perfect. Yeah.
Excellent. All right.
But your voice tend to be a bit soft. Do you think
Oh,
possibly?
okay.
Yes. Could you speak louder?
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, I will try. Okay, right, everyone. So I'll give you a very quick overview of how I've structured today's session. So it's essentially in 3 parts. So approximately for the first 30 minutes or so, I will give you a bit of context around educational theories and the theories that are relevant to our conversation today, but I'm going to keep it extremely brief, and I'm going to keep it as practical and as relevant as possible. And hopefully I can finish before the end of 30 minutes. And then in the second half, I want to move into a group discussion and look at some examples. But I'm hoping that there will be examples that you can share with the rest of the group as well. examples of what you are observing in your current practice, how things are working in your day-to-day education. Are there any interesting ideas that you'd like to share with? And then the third part will be brainstorming to identify action items that we can take forward beyond the webinar. So to go into a bit more detail on what that entails. So I'll start with the theoretical and practical aspects of human AI partnerships. Then together, we will look at an example of a paper that looks at how a partnership is applying to healthcare. Then from that, let's try to extrapolate to education and understand how these principles might apply to education and to us as educators. And through that, try to draw out some determinants of success, because that's essential, right? So for us to understand how we can apply these to our own contexts, we need to start to understand what are the determinants of success. Then, of course, as I mentioned, I'll invite you to share your examples of current human AI partnerships. We'll talk a little bit about lessons that have been learned and principles that we can take forward. And then, as I mentioned, we'll move into that last brainstorming session. I hope that's making sense, and I hope the audio is coming through clearly enough. Right. So let's now dive into the theoretical aspects. So I wanted to start with this really interesting paper that Iftika and colleagues have written around human agent teams, and the acronym reads nicely as HAT. So, and this concept of human agent teams is obviously critical for this topic of human AI partnerships. So, what does a HAT consist of? So, a human agent team consists of one or more humans and one or more IAs. So now IA stands for intelligent agents. And these elements interact with each other, either face-to-face or virtually. They possess one or more common goal. They exhibit interdependencies with relevance to workflows, goals, and outcomes, and have distinct roles. So these are some of the elements that define what a human agent team might look like. Now, I'm going to just pause there for just 1 minute and ask whether that makes sense. Does it make sense to everyone?
Yes, makes.
Yani, yeah, I can't quite see the.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, I can't see the participants because I'm in sharing mode.
Right. There's a comment say yes. Yes, it does. Just one respondent respond to that. Yes. Yes.
Excellent. Okay. Let me then return to my PowerPoint.
Okay. They said
right.
One of the participants said number 3 doesn't make sense a little. Please explain.
Right.
Number 3. Yes.
Okay. So interdependencies. Okay. So let's talk about that. So let's take a step back and look at a human team, which consists just of humans. If we think of it that way, would this make sense? So humans within a team would interact with each other. They may share common goals. They would have interdependencies. Now, what do we mean by interdependencies? Let's think, for example, if we look at, say, a team in an emergency situation, how the doctor, the nurse, the allied health professional, all of the other staff members, how they would be dependent on each other to make sure the patient is looked after. So that's the interdependency. So each element depends on each other. And so the workflow, the goals, and the outcomes, they're all determined through those interdependencies. Does that make sense? Okay. So there's some fluidity in the roles, even though there are distinct roles. People are willing to be fluid and flexible and step in and cover for each other.
Right. So they said now it does make sense, and thank you for answering that.
Not a problem, not a problem. And this is what I love. So please pause and ask questions as we go along. And as I say, I can't quite see your chat, so Piani will always point things out as we go along. Thanks, Piani. Right, so now, then as we look at this, we see that there's been quite a lot of work done in this area. And in fact, much of this work predates the current emergence of generative AI, but nevertheless remains really, really important and relevant to today's work. Now, there's a whole taxonomy of human agent team collaborations, but from that, I drew out 3 elements which I thought are really interesting and important for us to pause and consider. So the first is around static division of labor. So we know that in some teams, there's a very sort of a relatively permanent division of tasks between humans and agents. Now, I wonder whether I can ask the audience whether they can think of any examples of that, of current AI in use, where there are very clearly defined roles for the agent and the human. Is anyone able to think of an example?
Co-pilot. So when Rati responded to that, she said a co-pilot assisting in email.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. In email. Yes. And Rati, that's a really good point. And I think so it could be static, but we could also allow it to move into the next 2 levels. But I think what you're saying is in the way that it might be currently used, it could be a static division of labor where the role is clearly defined. But I think this is a really good example because we might be able to then now expand this to the other 2 levels as well. So let's look at item 2, which is adjustable automation, right? So that's when, let's say within that email context, we increase the level of autonomy that we allow the agent and say, in these instances, draft the response. Or it might even go to the extent of in these situations, or if these conditions are met, send an automated response. So we might be able to move to the second level and include a level of adjustable automation. Now, it's when we reach item 3 that it becomes really interesting, the adaptive automation, where we cede some of the control that we have as humans, and we give some of that control to the agent. And we allow the AI agent to make some decisions. And the AI agent starts to decide when it can send an automated response or when it should wait for the human operator to give permission to do that. So thank you, Rati, for that example, because I think it allows us to look across all 3 levels. Does that make sense?
Yeah, this one participant, Roshini, also talking about, I think she addressing item number 1. I think she said, how about generating of medication in pharma industry through AI usage? Does it fit well in this one of these 3 items?
Could you repeat that again, Piani?
Right. So she said, how about the generating of medication in pharma industry through AI usage?
Right. So when you, I'm just trying to understand what she might be meaning by the word generating. Are we talking about drug development, or are we talking about?
Oh, she said drug design. Drug design.
Okay, so she's talking about drug development and that whole emerging field. So that is a really interesting area where there's likely to be some significant growth and significant benefits to humans. Once again, that's an example, I think, that can cut across more than one area. So now, I think the important point that we have to understand is that these 3 levels are levels that we currently can decide. So we can say the agent is limited to level 1, and we can define its role to be static. So it could be playing a particular role in that drug development process, and we define where it stops. But if we want to go beyond that and use machine learning and allow the system to go beyond what we know, we could go into that stage of adjustable automation, or even to the adaptive automation, where we might start to see what the system can start to generate. So I think the answer to your question is that with most of our examples, where it belongs is a decision that we can make right now. So at the moment, the control is with us. The question remains, of course, for how long that control will be with us. But at the moment, that is where the control is. I hope that makes sense.
Okay, she said yes, it does.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you very much. And these are important questions because it helps us to get beneath just the words and the meanings and really get to the heart of what it looks like in application. So I really appreciate these questions as we go along. And I've put the references just in these slides as well, and I'm happy to share these slides. If anyone is interested in looking further at these taxonomies, I found them fascinating to look through, so I'll be very happy to share these articles for you to look at as well. So now we come to a really important component of a partnership, and that is the question of trust. And I think when it comes to AI, most of you would appreciate that trust has become one of the key considerations around how that define the extent to which we might use it, the extent to which we might allow it to come into education or healthcare practice. In fact, it is what stops most of us from using it even in day-to-day life, whether we trust this, whether it will exceed the control that we have given it, and whether it will stay within the limits that we have set. So now, there are 6 elements that have been identified as underpinning this trust development. And as you can see on the screen, so there's intention, measurability, predictability, agility, communication, and transparency. I think it's worth pausing here to explore what each of these items mean. And can I ask anyone from the participant group to maybe share with others what they understand by any of these elements? Is anything coming through, Piani?
Yeah, that's one comment. Intention, there's one response. Intention, AI tool should be fit for purpose.
That is a really good point. So the intention, now, fit for purpose, is that an intention or an aim? So really interesting point that you make there, Ati. So I'll invite others to also comment. So being fit for purpose, as I think that's a really important point. And I guess, Rati, I think I would say that if we maybe amend that slightly to say that if our aim is for something to be fit for a particular purpose, then I think it meets that intention criteria. So let's say we have an AI that is transcribing. Now, if it is designed solely and particularly for that purpose, and it is transcribing the data, then we can trust it as the accuracy develops, we can trust its intention. But if there is instead a platform that is routinely collecting all the information that we speak, all of the audio information, and presents itself as a transcribing tool. But if its intention is to capture the data and do something else with it, then the intention is not pure. And that's when I think trust starts to break down. So I think, Rati, your example is really useful for us to explore that. Thank you.
Mm.
Shall we explore one more item quickly before we move on?
Here we go. Here we go. Now, Rossini talking about transparency. So shall I read it to you,
Yes,
Prof?
please.
Oh, yeah,
Yes.
okay. So she said, transparency is like how AI can hold information and may use that information to other users, which is other word. She's saying that she tried to say that it's not really private because the data is being collected, so it's may be used negatively in certain situations.
That's a really good point.
Mm.
Thank you, Roshini. And I think it goes to the heart of what we talked about intention as well, right? So intention, all of these elements are not discrete, right? So there's overlap between them. So I think intention and transparency are fairly closely related, because if we are not transparent about what we do, then the intention is not the stated intention. So yeah, I think that's a really good point.
Yep. Prof, there's another comment from Tim Tan from NUHS. So it say predictability is hard for generative AI. We won't get the same answer all the time. We will need a range of acceptable outcomes. The range that we have, with the range that we can tolerate is going to be different for different use cases.
Thank you so much for that comment, because I think it's a very insightful comment, and one that we have to actively engage in and actively engage with. How do we deal with that that evolving nature of responses, and exactly what you have stated there? And interestingly, the example that I'm going to share with you is going to the heart of that issue. It's an example from the healthcare industry where AI is supporting clinical decisions. And that example goes right to the heart of that question of this issue that you have raised. So I thank you very much for bringing that up.
Okay, Prof,
Now,
there's one point here by Jeffrey. So it says transparency, the sources and algorithm have been used to craft the response should be revealed.
right. So that is another important concept, or an important item that's being discussed quite a lot in the literature. And it's, I think some people use the word explainability and explainable AI. So this whole black box phenomenon versus the explainability. And there's a lot of literature that looks at this concept of explainability. And it's quite an interesting phenomenon, because there's one way of thinking which suggests that that is the way to go, that if we make the outputs of AI more explainable, that leads to more trust. However, I've just come across another body of literature which highlights that in itself is not going to lead to trust, because it's possible to explain something post hoc. It's like when we make a decision and then we are asked to justify why we made that decision. Sometimes it is the process through which we came to it, but sometimes it's simply an explanation or a justification of the answer that we came up with. And with AI systems, both those possibilities exist. It is possible that we might come up with a system that can actually explain how it reached a particular conclusion. But with some of the systems that exist right now, what the literature is pointing out is that you can ask, for example, any of these systems to explain their answer, and they will give you a plausible answer. But that doesn't necessarily mean that that's the process through which it reached that conclusion. So again, a really important point, and one that I think we as humans have to deal with as we move through this. So unless there are any other burning issues, we might move forward, because I'm conscious that I said I'll finish in 30 minutes, but I sticked over to 30 minutes.
Okay,
Now,
one last thing. Yep. Sorry, Prof. Okay, okay.
Sure.
So there's one comment from Roshini again about communication.
Yeah.
So, yep. So she said, when generating a response to AI, the way it's communicate can imitate human quite closely, which may prove a little setback sometimes because it doesn't really get to the emotion. Oh, does it make sense? So emotion.
Right. Again, really interesting. So if we go into a bit of detail on the articles that I shared, and I'll share these references with you, they do go into some detail about these issues, and the concept of building trust through the way in which communication is done. Now, one of the examples that these articles had focused on was how, say, a digital platform would deal with an inaccuracy or an error. The level of regret that is expressed in its response. And we all know, like anyone who's used any of these platforms knows, when you correct it, it's very apologetic, and it comes up with a very apologetic and regretful response. Now, does that build trust or not? Now, we can argue it works both ways, but the literature is highlighting the need for that sort of regretful behavior, because human teams expect that regret from any of their other team members. So it's an expected part of dealing with error, and that needs to be built in. But at the same time, communication has been explored in much greater depth. For example, in platforms or in systems which are trying to change behavior, say change behavior of educators, they've pointed out that it's often perceived more positively if the outcome is presented as a benefit to the patient rather than to self. So interestingly, so it appears that we are more likely to respond to something and embrace it and act on it if it is presented to us as beneficial to patients. So there are ways of communication which can be more or less effective in changing behavior. So I hope that helps to unpack that a little bit. So on that note, I might move forward to another part of collaboration, and a really important component of collaboration, which is around shared mental models. I'm hopeful that at least some of you would be familiar with this literature on shared mental models. It's essentially, what a shared mental model means is that there is a shared understanding of the process, the outcomes, what is expected of a particular team activity. Now, what are the elements, or what are the ways in which these shared mental models can be further enhanced? So I'll pause for a second until everyone has a chance to read the dot points on the screen. And interestingly, the first one is around communication. So if I can just quickly explore these items. So communication strategies that evolve as they learn from human team members. Now, there's Van Zolen and colleagues have done some work around this, and they've looked at how communication strategies can actually change when systems start to learn from human agents, or human members, sorry, they're not human agents. Now, then Baranj et al. Expand this over to talk about how proactive agents can also understand human members' beliefs. So it can monitor dialogue and start to really get a sense of what the human members believe in, and not just stop there, but they can start to anticipate what the humans need. So really interesting and quite fascinating work that they've done. And as you can see, that work's been done in 2017. So it way predates some of the systems that we had at the moment. Then, once again, Schneidler has done a lot of work in this area. And so both the next 2 points relate to work by this author. And it's around that representation of the human intent. So how the intelligent agents can really get a sense of the human intent. And in the fourth point, it's about the changing intent. So you might start off a particular activity with a set intent, but that intention might change over time. And these intelligent agents are able to gauge that and respond to that as these changes happen. And of course, Hughes and colleagues have done some further work on that, and that's a 2020 paper, which looks at how that ability of intelligent agents to respond to those changing intentions have a significant positive effect on team performance. So now this is fairly complex literature, which is looking at very specific aspects of intelligent agents and how they respond to human teams. I think this is not something that we need to go too deeply into, but it's the principles, I feel, are what's important. The ability to respond to humans and that machine learning element of becoming a real part of a team and really understanding the human members of the team, responding to their beliefs, their intentions, and also monitoring changes in intentions. And as you can see, if we are going to invite these intelligent agents to become, say, part of a healthcare team, these sorts of attributes are going to be critical, and they're going to be really interesting to see how these attributes develop within our teams. So I think I might leave that point there because it's something really important. But I thought I'll move to this last point around evaluation. And I think this is probably one of the most important elements to think about. So how or what criteria would we use to suggest that a human agent team has been effective? There's a wide range of dimensions that have been used, and I've picked out a few that are relevant to our conversation today. So there's team effectiveness, task performance, mission success, then human workload, average efficiency, and performance perception. So these are all really important points to think about. And as you can see, that last element is not just about performance, but the perception of performance. And these are both really important, right? So we've got task performance, mission performance, but the final element is about the perception of that performance. And sometimes an objective evaluation is as important as an evaluation of perceptions. Any quick questions on that point before we move on?
I haven't seen any question yet so far.
Excellent. Okay. Hopefully everything's relatively clear as we move forward. So that summary statement is important, right? So if we want a comprehensive evaluation, we need metrics that are relevant to human performance, machine performance, and then that overall team performance. The two by itself doesn't add up to the third. So that overall team performance metric is also important. Now, okay, so colleagues, what I thought was that it would be really interesting for us to now explore an example. So this is an example that I wanted to explore. I thought we could do this collectively. Now let's see whether if I open this document, will it now, Piani, can you tell me what you are seeing so far?
I can't still seeing your slide.
Okay, let me stop that and
Okay.
go back to, I hope I will share the correct now.
Okay, here we go. I can
Yes?
see it. See it.
Okay,
Yes.
so can you see this Nature article?
Yes, I'm seeing it.
Excellent.
I can
Right.
see it. Yep.
Wonderful. Siobhan, I wonder whether we can give participants a link to that as well.
Oh, she did.
Oh, you are ahead of me. Well done, Siobhan. Right.
She's so quick.
Right. So what I thought is I'll quickly talk you through this because this is a fascinating article that I thought really goes to the heart of some of the concepts that we are discussing. And sometimes the theory doesn't really matter if it doesn't apply to practice. But this shows how the theory really comes alive through the study that these colleagues have done. So, and it's in the Nature portfolio. So it's a beautifully written article with all of the data really well presented. What I'm going to do is only touch on some of the key points, right? So the first point I want to make is that this is a study that has looked at human AI partnerships in making clinical decisions. And it has looked at some really interesting aspects of this. There are three important conceptual points that the authors have highlighted. So one is there's over-reliance, under-reliance, and opacity of judgments. So I think all of you can understand what this means, right? So if there is an AI output, sometimes as practitioners, we might be over-reliant on that output. Sometimes we might be under-reliant and we might refuse to accept something even though it's beneficial. And then there is that opacity, and that is something that we've talked about, right? So the opposite of transparency. If we can't understand how something is happening or why something's being done, we lose trust in that system and in those outputs, and therefore it affects the decisions that we make. Now, I will, now if we look at this diagram, and hopefully, is the enlarged diagram visible, Piani?
Yeah, now, yes. Now
Excellent.
it's better.
Okay, right. So just look at the two pictures on the right here, please. And I think what I want to highlight is how the study was done. So basically they did a study where they asked clinicians to make a diagnosis of a large number of, well, sorry, I need to go back and say who the clinicians were. So this was with endoscopy, so people doing endoscopies. So the endoscopists were asked to initially look at a video that included real life views of lesions, and they were asked to make a decision on whether it was an adenoma or not, essentially whether it was a lesion of concern or not. And then after a period of at least 2 weeks, they were shown the same videos in a different order with AI assistants pointing out the lesions and giving them some assistance with identifying the lesions. And the study was essentially trying to see what the difference was between the stage 1 and the stage 2 diagnoses that were reached by the clinicians, and the influence that the AI assistants had on the decisions that they were making. So as you can see, a very simple, a neat little way of looking at how clinicians make decisions. And this diagram highlights this really important concept of under and over reliance on AI or themselves. So this is an important point. So in item A, what we are seeing is that the clinician is more reliant or more confident of their own knowledge and is willing to discount the input provided by the AI system. So this is under reliance, where the clinician is not willing to accept, and there is under reliance on the AI input. This is the opposite, where there's over reliance. So accepting the AI input with little regard to their own judgment. And this is considered the ideal. So C is considered the ideal, where a clinician starts to evaluate what the AI presents equally with what they know, and they start to really balance these things out and then make a judgment based on both of those elements. Is it clear so far? Okay, thank you. Now, the findings are fascinating, but there's a huge amount of data here, so I don't want to spend too much time on this. What I have done is I have summarized the key findings on the next slide, but I'll just skim through so that everybody, I think everyone's got the link so that you can look at the detail when time permits. What I will now do is I'll go back to our slides and I will share with you the key findings. Piani, are we back with my slides?
Yes.
Excellent.
Now it's clear. Yes,
right.
The slide is on the screen.
Okay. Right. Okay. So as I mentioned, there were 3 points they made about the level of reliance on the AI output. And then the second point that was really important in what they did was that they asked the clinician initially to make their judgment, but in the second stage, they asked the clinician not only to make a decision in incorporating the AI input, but they asked the clinician to also rate their own confidence in the diagnosis and the confidence they had in the output that the AI was giving them. So it was not only about the decision they were making, but the confidence with which they were making that decision. So they were asked to make that assessment of confidence of themselves and assessment of confidence in the AI generated response as well. I hope that's clear. And I think this is why I can't remember who made that comment, Piani, at the beginning. And that's why I said it's very relevant to the example that we were going to discuss, because it goes to the heart of what this paper is presenting as a key component of partnering with AI systems. So if clinicians are to make meaningful decisions, we've got to start to develop those skills in examining our own confidence in a decision that we make and examining the confidence with which we can accept or reject a decision that's coming through an algorithm. So if I've summarized the key conclusions here. So the availability of AI advice is, so in this case, what they found is that the clinicians were well equipped to deal with this. And overall, it was very beneficial because the clinicians were looking at the AI advice as just one more piece of evidence that was presented to them. So they had what they would usually have in a clinical environment was available to them. And there was an enhancement of that through the AI input. So they saw it as one more piece of information that they could evaluate. The results also showed that endoscopists were substantially influenced by the AI opinions. But point 3 is when it becomes really interesting, that they were able to differentiate quite well between advice that was accurate and not. So it was, the clinicians were fairly skilled at understanding what was good advice and what was bad advice, and then being able to accept what was good and reject what was not. And of course, the fourth point, I guess, is the conclusion, which is that the hybrid team had on average better accuracy than the endoscopist alone. Now, this is a heartening outcome, but not a surprising one, right? Because we would expect this to be the case. And it is heartening to note that it is indeed so. Now, I think that was the example that I wanted to share in order to really highlight the relevance of some of the theory that we discussed up to now. I think this is probably where we should pause for some audience interaction. Now, are there any comments, Piani, so far?
So far, let me go down and see. Give me 1 second.
Yeah.
Okay, so far no. I have a question.
Yeah.
Someone have a question. So yes, please address the question.
Okay, thank you, Piani, and thank you, Professor, for bringing this lecture and introducing to this very interesting concept, which I was not aware of before. Several points here, and I'm just trying to assimilate the different important things you have brought out. But before touching upon all those things, one burning question that I had in the previous conclusions that you brought about was, you spoke about the confidence levels that was measured in this paper that you highlighted just now. So my question was, in the sense, was this confidence level and the diagnosis as such mapped against the experience of the clinician themselves, whether they were novice, like for example, are they beginning out in the career versus those of experts in the field, and how did that pan out on their reliance on the AI tool and the confidence per se?
Yeah, a fantastic question, Rathi. I was going to say we might not go into all of the detail, but I think this is a really relevant question. So let's go into a bit of detail. So that was one of the variables that they did consider. So they had approximately half-half. So experienced versus novice. They were all specialists, but experienced versus novice and endoscopists. And they looked at the difference between the two. And indeed, there was a difference. Now, I won't quote the paper because there are some important statistics through which you need to view the findings. But if I can present the simplistic conclusion, it was that the novice clinicians were more influenced by AI than the experts. In other words, experts tended to discard AI advice more often than the novices. But because the novices were more accepting of the AI advice, in other words, they were more confident in the AI advice, the impact on their practice was greater, positive and greater than the impact on the experts. Again, if you think about it, not a surprising outcome, right? Because we would expect that the novices do better with support, whereas the experts are generally okay even without the support. So yeah, that was important, but I think the detail is in the paper. Hopefully you can go into a bit more detail when you look at it.
Thank you very much for that clarification.
You're welcome, Rathi. You're welcome. Okay, now can I ask everybody whether we can now, based on this, draw some key, what are the messages that we can draw from this paper? So in other words, if we were to move from this paper into a different context, what would we identify as the general principles or the determinants of success that we can extract from this experience so that we can apply it elsewhere? Would anyone like to maybe speak or put it in the chat? What were the determinants of success? Maybe Priyani, do you think the question's clear enough, or do I need to?
Sorry, Prof. I need to ask for more clarity on how do you define success here? Making the diagnosis or what?
Right. Excellent. Excellent. Okay, so Rathi, shall we think of, I'm trying to think, okay, if we learn from this, how can we apply it elsewhere? So in other words, let's say one of the determinants of success is that these were competent clinicians, right? So the competence of the clinicians was a key determinant of success here. So I think that's an absolute starting point. Yes, we can't, so it underlines the need for human competence to be present and sustained in order for a partnership to be effective. What would be the other side of that coin, the other element that has to be high accuracy? I think that would be the accuracy of the algorithm, right? So the AI system has to also have a fairly high level of accuracy in diagnosing or pointing out these features. Does that make sense, Rathi?
Yeah, it does.
Okay, so I was hoping to sort of get these thoughts from the group, but I think, yeah, this was what I was trying to really distill down. So the success depended on the human practitioners being competent, on the AI system being accurate. But then the third point is what was really important, right? So when they came together, the ability of the human practitioners to assess their own level of confidence and the level of confidence in the AI-generated outputs. And this is where it becomes really important for us as educators, right? Because this concept of confidence, say when we assess somebody, do we allow people, or do we explore the level of confidence that they place in the answers they produce or the decisions that they make? So this is a really important area, and one that I think we as educators can probably give a lot of attention to as we move forward. And of course, that fourth point, which is the overarching point about the partnership, right? So at the end of the day, the human practitioner had that responsibility of putting all this information together and making that final decision. So that ability is a really crucial element. And I'm highlighting these because I thought these were the elements that were most relevant to us as educators. So if we think of the sorts of skills that our future graduates need to have, it's going to sort of move into this area, which is not a new competence, but it's a slightly different way of making decisions. And these added elements are things that we need to really give some attention to as we move forward. I thought we might pause there and maybe have a bit of a conversation about how these principles could apply to education. And if it is okay, I would really like to encourage or invite you to share your own examples so that we might analyze some of them and then maybe extract some principles. Siobhan, do we have the poly question that we can pose to the audience so that they can maybe share their thoughts? Would you like me to stop sharing?
Yeah, I'll pull up the screen.
Right. Okay, so colleagues, if you are okay to please scan that QR code, what we are asking is for you to share an example of a human AI partnership that you are familiar with. So it might be something that you've developed yourself, but it doesn't have to be. If you've seen anything in use, and I think we are sort of focusing on the education field now, but it's perfectly okay if you want to share something from your healthcare practice. But yeah, any examples, please. And if you can vote for each other's items, we will pick the one that comes up on top. So I'm going to go silent for the next 2 minutes, maybe. Could you please put in your examples?
Right. So while waiting, we just to inform you, Prof, we have 70 people, participants attending this webinar, which is great. So let's look forward to their example.
Thank you for that, Piani. Yes, I think yes. If we get the standard response that we usually get to our survey, at least if we exceed 50%, I'll be very happy. And please feel free to share any examples. It's a very collegial conversation, so yeah, you're welcome to share any examples from the most simple, basic to the most complex. It's fine.
Okay, here we go.
Excellent. Thank you for being the first.
I like that.
Wonderful. Love it. Yeah.
Language learning.
Wow. Excellent. AI-aided diagnosis. Fabulous. Wow. Okay, I'm impressed.
I'd like to hear from that one too. Curriculum development.
Yes.
Cool.
And colleagues, please feel free to vote for the ones that you like to have more discussion, because I'm really conscious that it's 3 minutes past the hour, so we only have about 20 minutes more.
Adaptive learning platforms. Patient education. Cool.
Okay, excellent. So, colleagues, in the interest of time, would you mind if I picked the top one for discussion? It looks like curriculum development has come out on top at the moment. Can I invite the person who put that in to maybe give us a very brief summary on what that involves? I hope we are not putting you on the spot. We only want a very brief summary. If not, we could talk about adaptive learning platforms. In fact, look, is there, maybe we should just open it out, Piani, to, yeah, is the one who put in adaptive learning platforms able to share with us?
No response.
No? Automated feedback, that's a nice one as well. Okay, so looks like we're not getting a huge amount of response. That's okay, I understand. Look, if you prefer to put it in the chat, we can capture it through the chat. That's okay. Maybe then, Siobhan, will hold on to these for now, and let me return to my PowerPoint. Siobhan, yeah, okay. I'll go back to. Okay, so what we were trying to do was to see how these would apply to education. So how can we explore one of these examples and maybe take it into education? Now, I thought, okay, just to, and this is purely to be a little provocative, what I've done is I have taken the outcomes or the determinants of success from the clinicians, and I've changed it just through the words to apply to educators. What does the group think? If we apply this to educators rather than clinicians, what would this be the determinants of success in an educator AI partnership? There is something coming in the chat. Is there, Piani?
There was some response. Yes, this one respond yes. The other one respond yes and no.
I love it. Okay, which one would like to explain why you said yes and why you said yes and no?
Okay, Rati, would you like to share why yes and no?
Yeah, okay. So let me just go about it. So the
All right.
reasons why I thought it is both yes and no is that there's certain points that I would agree to and certain points that I don't agree to. Because fundamentally, I think it goes back to the point of your philosophy, teaching philosophy as an educator. The reason being that if you are a learning facilitator with a kind of a humanistic connection, you are trying to interact with your students. In that case, I still think we haven't come to the stage where AI tools will be able to make that emotional connect, which also points to the point what Roshni mentioned in the chat earlier. How successful or how effective are these tools in making that human connections with your students? And that's something that we all enjoy in the classroom management. So that's something that we look forward in our classes, right? To be there, to know them in person, unlike and beyond our surveys of what their needs are and how we are trying to empower them and build their capacities. So that's the point that I disagree to, that this may not be the competence by which educators work. The other aspect of, the one that I thought of yes is, yeah, it does help in supporting us as competence of educators. So that's the aspect that I would agree to as yes, but a big no to the point that I mentioned, personally coming from what I do and or what I look forward into classroom interactions. But just out of curiosity, I just wanted to ask, in your previous example, I was a bit curious to understand that beyond these competence measurements that you use for the clinicians, was there a follow-up or another entirely different group studied about the perception of how clinicians perceive it when because you're speaking about performance and confidence, right? How comfortable are clinicians in giving up that to the AI tool? So that was something that I was a bit concerned about.
Thank you, Rathi. I think given the fact that we only have about a limited amount of time left, can I extrapolate from that to educators? So I think it's a really important question that you asked. But I think let's start with your first comment, which was around the learning process and the connection with learners. Now, as you can see, I deliberately use the word application to educators rather than to education. And the reason I did that was to look at this as something that is a tool or a partnership that benefits educators in their maybe professional development rather than in their practice of education. And if we look at a partnership of that nature, then we can start to see how educators and maybe an AI system could work together to upskill that body of educators. So as a form of professional development. And it was in that sense that I was trying to maybe stimulate some discussion to see whether we as a group of educators can see how an AI-based system might be used. That last point that you made about perceptions and confidence, I think is extremely important to us as educators. So can I bring that to the topic that we really have to unpack for this audience, which is around the application to educators, and ask about, maybe we can just sort of move into that brainstorming session and ask about what you would find really useful as a tool that might help you as educators. Or is there something that you as a group can share that might be useful to take forward? So the way we had conceptualized this final brainstorming session was to identify one or two actionable ideas from today's conversation to develop further. And I thought step one would be to see what the interest of the group was in identifying a really broad area. Like, do you want to look at student learning, or do you want to look at professional development of educators, or do you want to look at assessment, or is there some broad area that we can look at? And then within that, can we identify an actionable sub area that we might take forward? So given the really limited time that we have, can I please encourage everyone to maybe share some thoughts via the chat? And all ideas are welcome here. So it's brainstorming, so no judgment of any thoughts. Every idea is a good idea. So please, everyone, feel free to just type away. So this is the most, I think this is where everything comes together. And I'm hoping that there is interest in the group to go beyond this webinar and really look at some actionable areas. So colleagues, please share your thoughts. And those of you who have not had a chance to share thoughts yet, your contributions will be extremely valued. Anything coming through yet?
So far, no. So far, no.
Right.
Could you please rephrase the prompt? Could you
Right.
please rephrase the prompt?
Is it on the screen? Yeah. So, okay. If we want to, let me try and say it in different words. Okay. So one of the aims of this webinar is to identify a little project that we can take forward related to human AI partnerships. So if we were designing a project, in what area would you like that project to be? So I'm looking for interest in any particular area that we could design a project. And Piani, I don't know whether we share our thoughts around possibly then turning it into a bigger application. Did you want to share some thoughts on that?
Can I say something? I think I have some idea on this human and AI partnerships. Yeah. So I think all of us as educators, right? We mark assessment, we design assignment, assessment, and also we have to mark assessment, and we really wish that the way we mark is quite objective and consistent. And so, all in relation to the guided, marking criteria. So I think that's all the markers and educator will aim for. So I was thinking, like, if there is a way to work forward, would there be any, AI agent that can, work with us as educator to kind of like either design or perform the assessment? Yeah, so it could be either screening or either help us with the marking. And then, of course, and it needs to be partnership because the machine cannot mark alone and giving the grade. Maybe it's give us maybe a qualitative comments, quantitative comments or score, then we can use that information to kind of like further make adjustments. So my idea would be, if I like to work to move forward, I would thinking about to develop or to find the system, the AI and human system that can work together to kind of design and, perform the assessment on paper, student papers. Would it be possible?
So Piani, I think that's an interesting thought. Now, when we look at assessment, so there are multiple ways in which people are responding, right? So one is to look at assessment as, okay, assessment is what we currently do, and we look at tools to help us with what we currently do. Or we can look at a bigger picture level and ask whether our current assessment is going to be fit for purpose. So we could look at assessment design. So assessment design for the future graduate. And if we are looking medium to long term, that latter of designing assessments which are going to be more suitable for the graduate of the future might be a place where it might be really useful to put some effort into. I wonder what are your thoughts and what are the thoughts of others on that?
Okay, let's hear from other participants.
Anyone who has any thoughts on that?
Any ideas so far?
Could we just, so I think we've identified the broad area, which is assessment, Piani. Colleagues in the audience, could you give a sense of whether you agree with that broad area as an area to take forward? And if so, does assessment design appeal to you, or do you have any other thoughts? Please use the chat.
Okay, here we go. This one. Okay. Rati is responding to your question. I am sort of interested in design of assessment for future ready graduates. So that's her response.
Thank you, Rati. Others?
Yeah.
Competency mapping, okay. Okay, so we have one vote. Let's see. Is there? We are waiting for 65 others to respond.
Competency mapping, that's so cool.
Yeah. Is there any other response from the group? Okay, while we wait, I'm just really conscious that we are into our probably the last 5 minutes before I hand back to you, Piani. So maybe everybody needs a bit of time to think about this. And Siobhan, maybe we can follow up with the participants and gather their thoughts. Yeah, I think it's perfectly reasonable that everyone needs a little bit of time to think this over. That is fine. Can I then ask you whether we can pause there for a second and move on to the final stages? So, were there any other burning questions or comments before we start to wrap things up?
Right, I didn't
Does
see.
everyone?
I didn't see.
This Rati here again.
Yes, Rati.
So actually, it's more than a question. It's kind of articulating the discomfort I had when I was looking at the thing that you shared, but we didn't explore it further. But my initial sensation was a bit of discomfort when you spoke about the shared mental models, the different elements you had, and touching upon the point of performance. The discomfort arose from the point that these are very sensitive issues even within human teams, all human homogeneous teams. When you talk about performance and shared mental models, and how comfortable we are in owning a common success rather than individual success. And here we are talking about way ahead about heterogeneous models of human AI and about performance and how performance will be evaluated. I'm kind of trying to unpack, because there's a lot of content that you spoke today, and coming from. So basically, the very first thought is discomfort that I have in digesting these. So that's very sensitive, I think, from the point of, although we are seeing success models, and you shared a very good case example of its implications in things, but how does this whole thing pan out in space of performance and more towards perception? So those are points that you did touch, but we didn't explore further. So that's something that I would want to kind of ask others as well as yourself. How do you feel about it?
Fabulous. Thank you, Rati. I think that's a really important point.
Yeah.
And I have to say, discomfort is a wonderful thing, right? So discomfort is probably an important precursor to learning. And I think one of the key points that are coming out in the literature is that we've reached a point where we've got to unlearn some of the things we've learned and relearn. So we've learned, we now have to unlearn and relearn. So I think it's really important that you highlighted the discomfort that you're feeling, because I think all of us are experiencing that. We are uncomfortable with the speed at which things are happening. We are uncomfortable that we are constantly behind. So anyone working or trying to work in this area would be experiencing this. We are always behind because there's something new has happened yesterday and we've missed it. And you go away for a week and the world has changed. So there's a whole lot of discomfort. But I did think it was interesting that you brought up, you sort of characterized the human teams as homogeneous. And we thought it's not quite so, right? The heterogeneity in a human team is something we often overlook, and it's something that's very complex. So within the world of collaboration, that heterogeneity and responding to each other and understanding each other is the complexity. And you're quite right that a digital agent brings in a new dimension. But what it does is it actually allows us to understand ourselves a little better. Because when we start thinking of a digital agent, we immediately have to take a deeper look at ourselves. And this is something that we found when we tried to use a digital platform to support students to understand bias in AI outputs. For them to understand bias in an AI output, they actually have to understand the principles of bias, which then lead them to understand bias in themselves. So it's an opportunity. I think you're quite right, it's a challenge, but if we can shift it to be an opportunity for us to take a bit of insight into ourselves, that might be a really beneficial way forward.
Yeah. Apologies that I'm totally naive of the literature behind. I think I need time to digest this whole thing of human AI agent and intelligent agents thing. So
Absolutely.
Thank you so much. It's such an interesting topic. Need more time to go and assimilate it point by point. Thank you so very much for the organizers and for you as well, Prof.
Oh, you're most welcome. And I think that's a really good point on which to bring things to a close and hand back to Piani. So colleagues, I want to thank you for engaging with the topic. Really appreciated the comments and the questions that came through. And I think those were really insightful and allowed us to explore some of those concepts in greater depth. I'm hopeful that the examples showed the relevance of theory to practice. But as Rati's pointed out, we've only scratched the surface of a fascinating area. So I do encourage you to look further at the articles, and Siobhan might share the reference list with you. And I think, look, I've been absolutely fascinated by this literature, so I encourage you to look at it. And if we can identify an area to take forward, I would love to continue working with you. So on that note, I will thank you all and hand back to Piani.
Okay, yeah, all right. Thank you so much, Prof. Chintaka, for your excellent presentation and sharing experience with us. So I would asking if are there any last or burning question before we end the session? Oops. Okay. Right. So anyhow, if you have some question, we still have a forum open. So you can see on this slide, Shawan has shown us the QR code for the feedback form. So please feel free to scan the QR code and then provide feedback for us. And if you have additional question, please let us know. Okay, so probably have to unmute. Okay, yes. So then I think one of the last point that Prof. Chintaka would try to say is like to asking question about future. So moving forward from this session. So if you have some idea, some to work toward, and then just inform us as well, so we can provide more additional session to work together in advance in future, right? So then, right, I like to associate. So that's the feedback form, and also on the slide you can see the next session will on the artificial intelligence on our webinar. So the next topic would be as AI assisted assessment system part 1. So that will be delivered in August. So we'll talk about theoretical framework of how to do use assessment, and then on the following month we'll use the AI to more like in a hands-on session. So please feel free to follow us on that. And then do we have Shawan? Do we have the QR code on the social media? Is it the second one? Right. So we have the website. So in case that you are interested to continue to follow us, please go to the website. We have Instagram, we have our YouTube channel. So please feel free to do that. All right. Okay. And I think I would check one more time if we have any questions. So far now. Otherwise, Prof. Chintaka, thank you so much for your wonderful, excellent presentation and those ideas. And then also thank you for all the participants. I hope you kind of feel this session useful. All right. Thank you so much. All right.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
Piani.
Have a good
Thanks,
day,
everyone.
Prof. And then thanks, Shawan, for organizing that. Right. And have a wonderful day. Thank you for all the participants who attending. Okay. Okay, bye-bye. Have a good, wonderful day.